So this is the iPhone 16e, the cheapest new iPhone you can buy right now. And even though this phone is sort of replacing the iPhone SE3, which was a budget iPhone, at $600 US, it's pretty difficult to call this a budget iPhone. If I'm being completely honest, this is a mid-range phone, and that's also just in the US. I think in other countries, even here in Canada, this at $1,100 is not cheap. However, on the other hand, I have the iPhone 15 Pro, which is now a almost 2-year-old flagship phone from 2023. So this has all the bells and whistles, all the latest and greatest features that Apple had to offer back then. But now this phone also costs about the same as the 16e. I was able to pick this up for $650 US. So the goal of this video is not really to compare them to find out which one's better, because I think it's pretty obvious already. We know overall the 15 Pro is better. So instead, what I want to do is really compare them to see how close they are to each other and whether or not there is actually a reason to get the 16e. And believe it or not, there might actually be a reason or two to get the 16e over the 15 Pro, depending on a few factors, which we'll talk about. But first, I want to start with the design and build quality. So 16e, pretty simple and straightforward. You have a aluminum frame, Gorilla Glass on the back, and ceramic shield glass on the front. And I think the design is nice. I like how it looks. However, it only comes in 2 black and white colors. The 15 Pro, on the other hand, comes in 3 colors, a white, this space black, and natural titanium, which is probably my favorite one. It also has better materials. For example, instead of an aluminum frame, it has a titanium frame. And the 16e actually still has the older design as the iPhone 14s. So it still has really sharp edges, unlike the 15 Pro, which now has rounded edges. I think this is definitely an improvement. The 16e also doesn't have MagSafe, which is kind of a deal breaker, but you should be able to solve that issue with just a case. However, I think the biggest difference between these two phones, which you can't tell watching this video, is the weight. The 16e is 20 grams lighter than the 15 Pro, and the 15 Pro is not a heavy phone to begin with. It's still a fairly light phone, but this is, so light that it feels a bit too cheap in my opinion. And this is probably one of the first iPhones I've ever used that feels like this. It just feels plasticky, if that makes sense, or just airy. Now, when it comes to the screens, yes, the 16e only has a 60 Hz panel and the 15 Pro has a 120 Hz panel, and you can tell the difference, especially if you're going to play games or something. And yes, the 16e only goes up to 1200 nits of peak brightness, while the 15 Pro goes up to 2000 nits of peak brightness, which is noticeable. That's a big difference, especially in bright environments. But other than that, there's really not much of a difference. Even though the 15 Pro has a slightly higher resolution, the PPI on both phones is exactly the same, 460. So they look equally sharp. They're both also color accurate. They have deep blacks because they're OLED, good viewing angles, and they just are good screen. Although the 15 Pro definitely looks more modern because of the dynamic island and the thinner bezels, but I don't use the dynamic island for literally anything. So for me, having the notch or the dynamic island is just almost the same thing. The always on display is probably the biggest thing that I would actually miss from the 15 Pro, but other than that, the screen here is fine. Now, another thing that is basically identical on both phones is Apple Intelligence. I mean, they both even have the action button and you can set it to trigger visual intelligence. However, the problem with Apple Intelligence is that it's not all that intelligent, like even some of the basic things, just, speech to text, for example, it almost never works perfectly. And I guess it's not really an Apple Intelligence feature, but you get the idea, stuff like this. iPhones especially are falling a lot behind very quickly compared to Android phones. I think they are much better at stuff like this. But luckily, there are solutions both for Android and iPhone that are actually pretty good. For example, this super thin device, it's the size of a credit card. It's called the PLAUD Note, and the idea is simple. You basically just attach this to the back of your phone. You just MagSafe it. You hit the record button, place your phone somewhere close by, and you just start talking. That's it. And this thing will record everything you say for up to 30 hours. And once you're done talking, or whenever you stop recording, you can see a very accurate transcript of everything on your phone in the PLAUD app. It uses ChatGPT 4.0, so it actually works very well. And the best part is that it even gives you a summary of all the key points from everything it recorded, and even a mind map. Unlike recording on a phone, you don't have to worry about the battery running out, the storage, or even incoming calls stopping your recording. This is also SOC 2 and HIPAA compliant. which basically means that any general and health data that's recorded by this is stored and used securely for all the AI processing. Honestly, I think this thing is great for students to literally summarize entire lectures or even professionals who attend a lot of meetings. So I'll leave links below. Check it out. Now, getting back to Apple Intelligence, the reason why these phones do have it is because of their chips. The iPhone 15 Pro has the A17 Pro chip inside, and this has the A18 chip inside. Now, it's not the exact same chip that's in the iPhone 16. This is a slightly worse version, but you probably will never be able to tell the difference. So it's basically the same thing as what's inside the iPhone 16. So what does that mean for performance? Well, not much, because to be honest, that's just how phones have been for the past couple of years. You could almost buy any phone, especially when it comes to iPhones, and they're not gonna lag or freeze or anything like that. They're perfect for everyday use. One benefit you do potentially get with the 16E is that this will most likely get 1 extra year of software updates than the 15 Pro. However, 15 Pro will still, from now, get at least 3 and maybe even up to 5 years of software updates, which is plenty. But guess what? Another thing you definitely want to have plenty of on any phone is battery life. So the iPhone 15 Pro has a 3,274 milliamp hour battery. The 16E, on the other hand, has a 4,005 milliamp hour battery. And that's a huge difference. That's over 700 milliamp hours. That's massive. And I'll tell you what, even though it hasn't been too long since I've been using the 16E, I can already tell the difference. It's noticeable in actual real world usage. So on the 15 Pro, after like 5 or so hours of screen on time, where I'll have around 20 to 30% battery remaining, on the 16E, after almost 5 hours of screen on time, I had 50% battery remaining. That's a lot. I think it's been a very long time since I've actually used a phone that lasts this long. This phone was well on its way to get 9+ hours of screen on time. And honestly, that is, in my opinion, one big reason, or could be one big reason, to get the 16E over the 15 Pro, because this phone isn't necessarily known to have good battery life. Another reason to get the 16E over the 15 Pro could be due to overheating. To be fair though, I haven't noticed it ever. I've used the 15 Pro for a very long time, and I've actually used like 4 15 Pros, 4 different iPhone 15 Pros over the past 2 years. Never experienced overheating, but at the same time, there are many people who have experienced it on the 15 Pro and will tell you to not get this phone because of that. So what I've been able to conclude is that if you are in a part of the world that is generally hot and warm, then this is something you might want to think about. And it's not that it will just get warm. It could be a serious problem. For example, it may just shut off randomly while you're trying to use it. Or maybe you were outside. It will lower the screen brightness by a lot. But the 16E, at least so far, doesn't seem to have any problems like that. Now, last but not least, cameras. The 16E has one main wide-angle camera on the back. And even though it is a 48 megapixel camera, which is what also the 15 Pro has as the main camera, it's not actually the same exact sensors. The 15 Pro has a much bigger sensor, so it actually captures more light. It gives you more natural background blur, which makes the photos seem more like they're taken from a professional camera. It also makes it better in low light because it's capturing more light, and it can capture photos faster than the 16E, and it is also slightly sharper. And especially as a camera enthusiast, I was a bit disappointed to see that the 16E doesn't let you take raw photos, which is a big deal breaker for me. And so is not having an ultra wide angle camera. It's also missing other software features like cinematic mode. However, to be fair, the photos from the 16E do look fine. It's not like they look terrible. They're still good photos. It's only when you compare it to the 15 Pro you start to see the differences. So here's the bottom line. Of course, the 15 Pro is a better phone. And as I mentioned earlier, that we already knew. However, as I also mentioned during the video, that there are a few reasons to actually get the 16E over the 15 Pro. So it really depends on your needs. If you do actually value battery life a lot, this might be something you might actually want to consider. But overall though, for most people, I'd still think the 15 Pro is the better phone to get. It just gives you a much better value overall. I've also compared the 15 Pro to the iPhone 16 Pro, and this one's actually very similar to that phone as well. So if you want to check that out, it's right here. But that's all for this video, and I'll see you later.